the Exodus and the birth of a nation, the silence of 400 years. There are moments in history when it seems as though God is silent. Generations come and go. Empires rise and fall. People pray, suffer, and wait. And heaven appears quiet. For the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, those moments stretched into centuries. When Joseph died, an era ended. The great statesman who had saved Egypt from starvation was gone. The man whose wisdom had preserved nations became a memory. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. Children grew into parents. Parents became grandparents. Grandparents became stories. The Egypt that once honored Joseph slowly forgot him. History has a way of erasing gratitude. Eventually, a new Pharaoh ascended the throne. He knew nothing of Joseph, nothing of the famine, nothing of the Hebrew who had rescued Egypt. All he saw was a growing people, a people who were different, a people who multiplied, a people who did not belong. Fear entered his heart, and fear has often been the birthplace of oppression. The Israelites had become numerous throughout the fertile region of Goshen. What had once been a family of 70 souls had become a vast nation. God's promise to Abraham was unfolding exactly as he had spoken centuries earlier. Yet God's blessings often attract resistance. The more the Hebrews prospered, the more Pharaoh worried. The more they multiplied, the more threatened Egypt felt. Finally, Pharaoh made a decision that would alter the course of history. The Israelites would become slaves. What began as discrimination became oppression. What began as suspicion became cruelty. What began as policy became bondage. Soon Hebrew men were forced into hard labor. They carried massive stones beneath the scorching Egyptian sun. They mixed mud and straw to make bricks. They built cities they would never own, monuments they would never enjoy, palaces they would never enter. Every sunrise brought exhaustion. Every sunset brought pain. The crack of whips echoed across construction sites. Dust filled the air. Sweat covered their bodies. Hope slowly faded. But something Pharaoh could not understand continued to happen. The Israelites kept growing. The more they suffered, the stronger they became. The more they were crushed, the more they multiplied. Because no earthly king can stop a promise spoken by God. Pharaoh's fear became desperation. Desperation became evil. And evil produced one of the darkest commands in biblical history. Every Hebrew baby boy was to be killed. A generation was marked for destruction before it could even learn to walk. Mothers wept. Families hid. Fear spread through every Hebrew home. Darkness seemed to reign. Yet behind the scenes, God was preparing a deliverer. A child was about to be born, and through that child, God would shake the most powerful empire on earth. A child floating between death and destiny. In a humble Hebrew home, a woman gave birth to a son. The world saw an infant. God saw a liberator. His mother immediately recognized something extraordinary. Perhaps it was intuition. Perhaps faith. Perhaps the quiet whisper of the Spirit. Whatever it was, she knew this child must be protected. For 3 months, she hid him. Every cry could bring soldiers. Every sound could mean death. Every day was a battle against fear. Imagine the tension. The mother listening for footsteps outside, the father watching nervously through the doorway. The family praying that the baby would remain quiet just a little longer. But eventually, the impossible became unavoidable. The child could no longer be hidden. And so his mother made a heartbreaking decision. She built a small basket. Carefully sealing it with tar and pitch, she placed her baby inside. Then she carried him to the Nile River. Perhaps tears filled her eyes. Perhaps her hands trembled. Perhaps she whispered one final prayer. Then she released him. Imagine the scene. A tiny basket drifting upon the waters. A helpless infant floating between life and death, between fear and faith, between uncertainty and destiny. What appeared to be abandonment was actually one of the greatest acts of trust in Scripture, because sometimes faith means releasing what you love into the hands of God. The Nile carried the basket directly toward Pharaoh's daughter. The princess noticed it among the reeds. Curious, she approached. When she opened the basket, she found a crying child. At that moment, compassion overcame politics, mercy overcame policy, love overcame fear. She adopted the boy, and she named him Moses, drawn out of the water. The irony is breathtaking. The very river Pharaoh intended to use as an instrument of death became God's instrument of salvation. And the future deliverer of Israel would grow up in the palace of Israel's oppressor. Only God could write a story like that. The prince who never forgot Moses grew up surrounded by unimaginable privilege. He walked marble halls. He studied under Egypt's greatest teachers. He learned military strategy, government administration, diplomacy, science, language, leadership. Egypt was the most advanced civilization on earth, and Moses received the best it could offer. Yet despite his royal education, something deep inside him remained unsettled. He knew who he was. He knew where he came from. He knew that beyond the palace walls, his people suffered. Day after day, he witnessed the contrast. Luxury for some, misery for others, comfort for a few, bondage for many. Eventually, the tension became unbearable. One day, Moses saw an Egyptian overseer brutally beating a Hebrew slave. The sight ignited something within him: anger, compassion, justice, perhaps all three. Looking around and seeing no witnesses, Moses struck the Egyptian. The man fell dead. For a moment, Moses may have believed he was becoming Israel's deliverer. Instead, he became a fugitive. The next day, his secret was exposed. News spread quickly. Pharaoh heard. A death sentence followed. The prince became an outlaw overnight. Everything he had known vanished. The palace was gone. His future disappeared. His dreams collapsed. And so Moses fled into the wilderness. At 40 years old, he lost everything, or so it seemed. Because sometimes what feels like the end of your story is actually God's beginning. The University of the Desert. The desert became Moses' classroom. No palace, no throne, no servants, no recognition, only endless horizons, burning heat, cold nights, and sheep. For 40 years, Moses lived as a shepherd. 40 years, longer than many careers, longer than many lifetimes in the ancient world. Imagine the transformation. The man trained to command armies now guided sheep. The man educated to govern kingdoms now searched for water in barren valleys. The man who once wore royal garments now lived beneath open skies. Yet God was doing something invisible. The desert was stripping away pride, teaching patience, building endurance, developing humility, preparing character. Because before God entrusts someone with influence, he often teaches them dependence. Moses had spent 40 years learning how to be somebody. Now he would spend 40 years learning how to become nobody. Only then would he be ready for God to use him. And one ordinary day, while tending sheep near Mount Horeb, everything changed. The silence of 40 years was about to end. The voice of God was about to speak. The fire that would not die. The sun was sinking over the desert horizon. The wind moved gently across the mountains. Nothing appeared unusual. Then Moses saw it. A bush engulfed in flames. At first, it seemed ordinary enough. Lightning strikes and wildfires were not uncommon. But something was different. The bush was burning. Yet it was not being consumed. The fire danced, the flames moved, but the branches remained intact. Nature itself seemed suspended. Moses stepped closer. Curiosity became wonder. Wonder became awe. Then a voice emerged from the fire. Moses. Pause. Moses. The sound penetrated deeper than his ears. It reached his soul. And suddenly, Moses understood. This was no ordinary fire.